The night was colder than anything he had ever known. The human soldier sat inside his small tent, trying to keep the weak fire alive. Every gust of wind sounded like knives cutting through the thin fabric. The frozen air bit into his skin. Even though he wore every layer of clothing he had, he rubbed his hands together, but the cold still crawled into his bones outside. The storm howled across the barren ice plains. Snow and shards of ice slammed against the tent like fists. The man knew that if the fire went out, he would not survive the night. His food was almost gone, his radio was broken, and the base was too far to reach in this weather. He was truly alone, or so he thought. The night stretched on, silent except for the storm. His eyes were heavy, his body weak, but suddenly he felt something strange. The fabric of the tent moved slightly. He froze, his hand reaching for the knife at his side for a moment. He thought the storm was tearing the tent open. But then the flap lifted. Through the narrow opening, a figure stumbled inside. The soldier's breath caught. It was not another human. It was an alien girl. She was trembling, her body small but strong in shape. Her skin glowed faintly under the firelight. A pale shade touched with blue. Her hair was wet with ice, and her lips shivered with each breath. She looked half dead, yet her glowing eyes fixed on the fire as if it was the only thing keeping her alive. The soldier gripped his knife tighter. His heart pounded. Was this a trick? Was she here to kill him or to spy? His orders were clear. Aliens were enemies. Dangerous, not to be trusted, but the girl did not attack. She did not even move toward him. She only knelt by the entrance, breathing hard, her body shaking like a leaf. The firelight flickered across her face, revealing her desperation. Her clothes were thin, torn by the storm. Her hands were nearly frozen, fingers curled as if they no longer obeyed her. Each breath she took was a fight, and her chest rose and fell like she was about to collapse. The soldier wanted to shout at her, to push her back into the storm, but something inside him stopped his voice. He saw the way she looked at the fire, not at him, not at his knife. She wanted warmth, nothing more still. His body stayed tense. The silence between them was thick, heavier than the snow outside. The wind screamed around the tent, but inside, the only sounds were the weak crackle of the fire and her ragged breaths. He thought of the stories, aliens luring humans into traps, using weakness as a weapon. Was she one of those? Minutes stretched like hours, neither moved, neither spoke. His knife remained in his hand, and her hands remained open and empty on the ground. Finally, the soldier shifted. He pulled a small blanket from his pack and slowly placed it on the floor between them. He did not hand it to her. He did not trust her enough for that. But he left it where she could take it. Her glowing eyes lifted to him for the first time. They were not the eyes of an enemy soldier, not filled with hate or anger, but with fear and exhaustion. For a second, he saw something almost human in her expression. She hesitated, then weakly pulled the blanket around her shoulders. Her body curled under the cloth, and she closed her eyes. The soldier sat still, knife still ready. Watching her every move, his thoughts were loud in the quiet tent. Why was she here? Why did she come to his tent? Out of the whole frozen wasteland, why him? The fire crackled weakly, and he fed it one more piece of wood. He kept his eyes on her glowing face, wondering if he had just saved himself or doomed himself. Outside, the storm roared like a beast. Inside, the human soldier and the alien girl sat in silence, trapped together in the frozen night. Neither trusted the other, but neither had the strength to leave. The question hung heavy in the air. What would happen when the storm ended? The soldier did not sleep. He kept his knife close, but he could not deny the strange feeling growing inside him. For the first time since the war began, he was not completely alone, and that thought made him freeze more than the cold ever could. The storm outside grew worse, shaking the thin walls of the tent. The human soldier sat close to the fire, knife in hand, eyes locked on the alien girl. She was still wrapped in the blanket he had left for her, trembling but no longer on the edge of collapse. The glow of her skin softened in the firelight, casting strange shadows on the walls. Every second felt stretched. The soldier's heart beat loud in his chest. Louder than the storm, he tried to read her face, but she kept her eyes down, staring at the flickering flames. Her breathing was slow, uneven, as if each breath carried the weight of 1,000 battles. The silence pressed against him like a heavy hand. He wanted to ask her something, anything, but his throat felt dry. His training screamed at him to act, to bind her hands, to push her out, to call for backup if his radio had worked. But the storm made that impossible, and some small voice inside whispered that she was not here to kill him. Not tonight. The girl shifted slightly, pulling the blanket tighter. Her hands peeked out, thin and shaking. The soldier noticed the frostbite marks, skin cracked and pale. She must have wandered in the storm for hours, maybe days. How had she survived until now? The thought disturbed him more than he expected. He coughed to break the silence, but she did not look up. He tried again, his voice rough. "What do you want?" The words hung in the air, swallowed by the wind outside. The alien girl did not answer. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. She only pressed her hands closer to the fire, as if the warmth was the only language she understood. The soldier's grip on the knife loosened just a little. He set it down beside him, close enough to grab in an instant, but far enough to show he would not strike first. He leaned back against the wall of the tent. His eyes still sharp, still wary, the minutes crawled on. The storm screamed, the fire hissed, and between them sat two strangers, bound together by the cold. The soldier could not deny the strange tension building. It was not the tension of battle, but of something unknown, something fragile then without warning. The alien girl coughed. It was sharp and painful. She curled forward, her body shaking. The soldier's instinct pulled him forward. He reached for his canteen and set it near her. She hesitated, her glowing eyes flickering up at him. For the first time, their gazes locked. Her eyes were unlike anything he had ever seen. They glowed faintly like stars trapped in glass. They were filled with both fear and need, and something deeper, something he could not name. Slowly she reached out, her fingers brushing the metal. She took the canteen and drank in small, desperate gulps. The soldier felt his throat tighten. He was giving away his own supply, and yet he could not stop himself. Watching her drink was like watching someone cling to life itself. When she finished, she set the canteen down gently. Almost with respect, her lips trembled, as if she wanted to speak, but again no words came. Only her eyes told him what she could not say. "Thanks." The soldier's chest felt heavy. He looked away, pretending to adjust the fire. The flames burned low. He fed it one of his last sticks of wood. Every resource he gave to her, water, warmth, even a blanket, was a risk. A sacrifice, but still he gave them. A sudden noise outside made him freeze. The wind carried something different, a sound that did not belong to the storm. He tilted his head, listening. The girl stiffened too, her glowing eyes darting toward the flap of the tent. It was faint, almost hidden under the storm, but it was there, footsteps heavy and slow, moving across the frozen ground. The soldier's hand shot back to his knife. His body tensed. He looked at the girl. She was trembling again, but this time not from the cold. Her eyes widened and her lips moved, whispering words he could not understand. The language was alien, but the fear was clear. Someone was out there searching. The soldier's pulse quickened. He leaned forward, whispering in a low voice. "Who is it?" His question was sharp, almost an accusation, but the girl only shook her head, tears forming in her glowing eyes. The footsteps faded into the distance, swallowed by the storm. But the silence they left behind was worse. The soldier sat back, his chest rising and falling. His grip on the knife was tight again. The girl pressed her hands against her chest, clutching the blanket like a shield. She still would not speak his language. But her body told him everything. Whoever was out there, she feared them more than she feared him. The soldier did not know what to do. He felt trapped not by the storm, but by the presence of this stranger in his tent. She was fragile, weak, and yet she carried a mystery that chilled him more than the ice. The firelight flickered across their faces, casting long shadows on the canvas walls. They were enemies, yet at this moment, both were prisoners of the same cold night. The soldier leaned closer to the fire, his voice low. "You're not leaving, are you?" He already knew the answer. The girl lowered her head, silent, her glowing eyes reflecting the flames. He tightened the blanket around his shoulders, but the real chill came not from the storm. It came from the truth he could not escape. He was no longer alone, and he could not decide if that made him safer or doomed. The storm raged on, and the tent became a fragile world of its own. Inside sat a human soldier and an alien girl, strangers in every way, yet forced together by the night. The soldier tried to keep his eyes open, tried not to drift into sleep, but his thoughts kept circling. Who was she? Why was she here? And what would happen when the storm ended? The questions lingered, heavy and sharp, as the fire burned lower and the cold pressed in. The storm outside still raged like a beast pounding against the walls of the tent. The human soldier sat with his back against the thin canvas, his knife resting beside him. His eyes never left the alien girl. She was wrapped in the blanket, her glowing skin dim in the fading firelight. Her breaths came in soft shivers, each one fragile yet stubbornly alive. Hours had passed in silence. He had given her water, a blanket, even fire, but still she had not spoken a single word he understood. She was a stranger, and strangers meant danger. But in this frozen wasteland she seemed more like a ghost that had stumbled into his lonely prison of canvas and fire. The soldier's thoughts grew heavy. He could feel his eyelids pulling down. He shook his head, forcing himself to stay awake. He could not afford to sleep, not with her sitting so close. He told himself she was an enemy, a threat, a risk he could not measure, and yet, the sight of her trembling shoulders stirred something inside him he could not explain. The fire snapped loudly, breaking the silence. The girl flinched, her eyes opening wider. For a moment the soldier thought she would finally speak, but again she said nothing. Only her gaze lingered on him longer this time. Glowing faintly, reflecting the flames, the soldier exhaled slowly. His hand moved to adjust the logs in the fire. He wondered how long the storm would last. 1 night, maybe 2, if he was trapped here with her. What then it happened, a sound so soft, so fragile, that he almost thought it was the storm whispering through the cracks. Her lips moved and a single word escaped. His name. The soldier froze. The knife nearly slipped from his hand. He turned sharply toward her, his heart thundering in his chest. "What did you say?" he whispered. His voice cracked, the alien girl's lips trembled. Her glowing eyes filled with something between fear and determination. She repeated it, clearer this time. His name, the very name only his comrades or commanders ever used. His body went cold, colder than the storm outside. How did she know? Who had told her? Was she a spy? Was this whole act a trick to lower his guard? The soldier rose halfway to his feet. His knife now back in his hand, his muscles were tight. His breathing sharp, he stared at her, demanding answers with his eyes. The girl did not move. She pulled the blanket tighter, but her gaze never left his. It was not the look of an assassin, not the look of an enemy soldier. It was the look of someone clinging to survival. "Tell me," the soldier growled, his voice low but dangerous. "How do you know my name?" She opened her mouth, her voice weak, broken. "Heard," she said slowly, in halting human words. Her accent twisted the syllables. But the meaning struck him like a blade. He blinked, unsure. "You—" "Heard," he repeated. She nodded, coughing lightly. "Camp. Men. Say." Her words came slowly, painfully, like each one was dragged from deep inside her. She was not fluent, but she was trying. The soldier lowered the knife slightly. His mind raced. If she had heard his name at the camp, it meant she had been close, too close, close enough to listen. Close enough to know, but why? The girl's voice cracked again. She pressed a hand against her chest, whispering, "Safe. Need safe." Her glowing eyes shimmered with tears. Her voice was weak, but it carried a weight that sank into him. The soldier's jaw tightened. Safe. That word echoed in his mind. He remembered the radio orders. No alien is to be helped. No alien is safe. And yet here she was, sitting in his tent, shaking, whispering his name, asking for safety. The silence between them deepened. Heavier now, the storm outside screamed. But inside the tent, it was her words that carried the true storm. The soldier paced the small space, the knife still in his hand. His heart told him she was broken, desperate, not a threat. But his training screamed that weakness was a mask, that she could be a weapon. The alien girl's head lowered, her strength fading. She whispered again, softer this time. Safe. The word was almost a plea, almost a prayer. The soldier's hand shook. He wanted to believe her, but the war had taught him never to trust. He looked at the fire, the weak, flickering light that kept them alive, and wondered if he had just invited his own death. A sudden gust tore at the tent, nearly ripping the flap open. Both of them turned sharply. The soldier raised his knife. The girl clutched the blanket. Outside, the storm roared, but beneath it he thought he heard voices, distant, echoing. The girl's eyes widened in terror. She whispered something in her own language. Fast and trembling, she crawled closer to the fire, as if it could shield her from the sound. The soldier's stomach tightened. His instincts told him the storm had hidden more than just the cold. There were others out there. Searching, his knife was ready, but his thoughts were not. Inside the fragile walls of his tent, the alien girl had spoken her first human words, words that made him freeze, words that shook the ground beneath everything he believed, and as the voices outside grew louder, the soldier realized he would soon have to choose, trust the stranger who knew his name, or obey the orders that told him she was nothing but the enemy. The voices outside faded slowly into the storm, leaving behind only the sound of the wind and the steady crackle of the fire. The human soldier lowered his knife, but his eyes remained sharp, his heart still pounded, not just from the noise but from the word she had spoken. Safe that word haunted him. It was not a word of war, it was a word of desperation. The alien girl sat close to the fire, her small frame shaking under the blanket. Her glowing eyes watched the flames hungrily, not just for warmth but for life. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak again, but then her stomach growled, the sound breaking the silence like thunder inside the tiny tent. The soldier stiffened. His supplies were low. He had barely enough food to last another day, maybe two. His rations were precious, more valuable than gold in this frozen wasteland. Yet the sight of her holding her stomach, her face tight with pain, pulled at something inside him. He opened his pack slowly, pulling out a small piece of bread. It was hard and stale, but it was all he had. He stared at it, his hand heavy. His orders echoed in his mind. No alien is to be fed. No alien is to be trusted. If his commanders saw him now, they would brand him a traitor. Still, his hand moved. He placed the bread near her on the floor. Not too close, not in her hands. Just enough for her to take if she dared. The alien girl looked at the bread with wide eyes. Her glowing gaze flicked to him, then back to the food. For a moment she hesitated, her pride or fear holding her still, but hunger was stronger with trembling fingers. She reached out and took the bread. She ate slowly, carefully, each bite small, as if she wanted to make it last forever. Her glowing eyes softened as she chewed, and for the first time since entering the tent, her shoulders seemed to relax. The soldier watched her in silence. His throat tightened as he realized how fragile she looked. Like a bird on the edge of breaking, he hated himself for giving up his food. Yet he could not stop. When the last piece of bread was gone, the girl held the empty cloth in her hands, staring at it as if it were something sacred. Then her lips parted, and she whispered in her broken voice, "Thank you." The words struck him harder than the storm outside. He did not expect them. He did not expect her to understand enough. Yet there they were, weak and fragile, but real. He turned away, hiding the strange feeling that tightened his chest. He told himself it was nothing, just survival, just instinct. But deep inside, he knew it was more. The girl's eyes shimmered with tears. She spoke again, haltingly. "Others out. There." She pointed weakly toward the storm outside, her voice cracked. "Cold. Dying." The soldier's grip tightened on his knife. His stomach twisted. Did she mean there were more like her? Were they near? Were they waiting to attack? He narrowed his eyes. "How many?" he asked sharply. The girl shook her head, struggling with the words, "Few left," she whispered. Her glowing eyes filled with sorrow. "Hunters. Take rest." Her hand moved across her throat in a motion that needed no translation. The soldier's blood ran cold. He stared at her, torn between anger and pity. If what she said was true, her people were being hunted, wiped out, left to die in the snow, and now she was here, the last ember of a dying fire, sitting inside his tent asking for warmth and safety. He wanted to believe her, but the war had filled him with doubt. What if she was lying? What if this was all a trap to weaken him? Suddenly, a shadow flickered across the tent wall. The soldier stiffened, his hand gripping the knife tightly again. He leaned forward, his breath sharp. The girl gasped softly, pulling the blanket closer around her for a moment. He thought it was the hunters she spoke of, but when the sound came, it was only the storm shifting, throwing snow and ice against the thin walls. The soldier exhaled, his nerves raw. The girl's body trembled, her lips moved again, whispering words in her own language, soft, almost like a prayer. Her glowing eyes shone with both fear and hope. The soldier sat back, his chest heavy. He wanted to shut her out, to keep his walls high, but her presence had already broken something inside him. Her hunger, her weakness, her fragile voice, it was too human to ignore. He reached into his pack again, pulling out another small ration. He almost cursed himself as he did it, but he set it down near her anyway. "Don't get used to it," he muttered, His voice was rough, but his hand trembled as he pulled back. The girl's glowing eyes met his, and for a heartbeat there was silence. Then she reached forward, her fingers brushing the food gently, almost with reverence. She ate again, slowly, carefully, her tears mixing with the crumbs. The soldier looked away, staring at the fire. His thoughts were louder than the storm. He was breaking every rule, risking everything, but he could not stop. Outside, the storm roared, but inside, a fragile bond was forming, built on bread, fire, and silence. The soldier did not know what tomorrow would bring, or if he would live to see it. But tonight, in the frozen wasteland, he had given food to the enemy, and that simple act might change everything. The storm had quieted to a dull roar. The fire inside the tent burned low, casting long shadows across the canvas walls. The human soldier sat with his back straight, his knife resting on his knee. His eyes were locked on the alien girl. She was curled under the blanket, her face faintly glowing in the dim light. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Hours had passed since she had spoken about others and hunters. The words echoed in his head, repeating again and again. He wanted answers. He needed to know the truth. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice sharp but low. "Tell me," he said, "why are you here? What are you running from?" The girl's glowing eyes flickered open. For a long moment, she only stared at him, as if weighing whether to trust him. Then in her broken human tongue, she whispered, "They betrayed us." The soldier's grip tightened on the knife, his heartbeat quickened. "Who betrayed you?" he asked. His voice was rough.
Carrying suspicion and anger, she swallowed,
her lips trembling. "Leaders promised safety," she said slowly, "but sold us to hunters." Her voice cracked, tears forming in her eyes. "My people. Taken, chained, killed?" The soldier froze. The image her words painted sank deep into him. His mind replayed the orders from command. Aliens are dangerous. Aliens are enemies, but her broken voice did not sound dangerous. It sounded broken, it sounded true. She pressed her hands to her chest, clutching the blanket as if it were the only thing keeping her alive. "I ran," she whispered, her tears glowing faintly in the firelight. "Storm chased me cold, almost killed me." She looked at him, her eyes sharp with pain. "Then, I found you." The soldier's jaw tightened. He wanted to call her a liar. He wanted to shut her words out. But deep inside, something twisted. He had seen betrayal before. He had seen commanders sacrifice their own men for power. Was it so hard to believe her people had been betrayed too? His radio crackled suddenly. The faint voice of his bass cut through the static. He grabbed it quickly, pressing it to his ear. "Unit 7. Report," the voice demanded. "Storm readings show movement near your location." "Confirm status over." The soldier hesitated. His eyes flicked to the alien girl. She stared at him silently, her glowing eyes wide. Her lips moved in a whisper he could barely hear. "Please." His hand shook as he pressed the radio button. He spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully. "Unit 7, storm heavy. Visibility low. No contact, holding position. Over." The radio crackled again. "Copy, Unit 7. Hold until further orders." Then it went silent. The soldier lowered the radio. His chest rose and fell sharply. He had lied. He had reported no contact, even though an alien girl sat in front of him, shivering in his blanket, eating his food. His orders had been clear. Report any alien presence immediately. But something in her broken voice, something in her glowing eyes, had stopped him. The girl lowered her head. Tears slipping down her cheeks, she whispered, "Thank you." In her halting words, the soldier looked away. Staring into the fire, his thoughts were loud. Heavier than the storm, he was breaking every rule, every command, but deep inside he felt something shift. He turned back to her, his voice low. "Why me?" he asked. "Why come to my tent?" She looked up, her glowing eyes steady. "I heard your name," she whispered. "Men speak of you. Say you are different." The soldier froze. Different. The word hung in the air like a knife. He wanted to deny it. He wanted to demand what she meant. But he could not. The girl's voice grew weaker. She leaned closer to the fire, her body trembling. "Others died," she whispered. "I thought, if I find you, maybe I live." The soldier's throat tightened. He gripped his knife, but his hand trembled. He told himself she was just manipulating him, just saying what he wanted to hear, but her tears, her shaking body, her broken voice, they were not lies. They were too raw, too real. He stared at her, his mind at war, On one side was duty, loyalty to his command. On the other was this fragile creature, who had stumbled into his tent and whispered his name like it was her last prayer. The fire burned lower, shadows dancing wildly on the walls. Outside, the storm began to calm, but inside the tent another storm raged. The soldier whispered to himself, barely loud enough for her to hear. "What am I doing?" His knife lowered to the ground. His hand covered his face, the weight of his choice pressed on him like ice. The alien girl reached forward weakly. Her fingers trembling, she did not touch him, but she placed her hand close to his on the ground. Her glowing eyes looked into his, filled with fear but also trust. For the first time since the war began, someone looked at him not as a soldier, not as an enemy, but as a man. The soldier felt his chest tighten. His throat burned. He wanted to speak, to tell her something. But the words would not come. Instead, he only stared at her hand near his, the fire between them, the storm outside, and the truth that now sat heavy in the air. He had chosen not to betray her. He had chosen her over his orders, and that truth would change everything. The fire was dying, the last bits of wood turning to glowing ash. The soldier stared at the embers, his jaw tight. His chest felt heavy with the weight of his choice. He had lied to his command. He had broken the rule drilled into him since the war began. And all for her, the alien girl trembling in his tent. She sat wrapped in the blanket, her glowing skin faint in the shadows. Her eyes never left him. There was fear in them, yes, but also something softer, something that unsettled him more than the storm outside. It was trust, fragile and small, but real. The wind outside howled again. But beneath it another sound crept closer. The soldier stiffened. His head turned sharply toward the tent flap. It was faint but steady. Footsteps crunching against the frozen ground. The girl's glowing eyes widened. Her lips moved in a whisper he could not understand. She clutched the blanket tighter, curling closer to the fire as if it could hide her. The soldier grabbed his knife and moved silently to the tent flap. He pressed his ear against the canvas, listening. The storm tried to swallow the sound, but it was there. Several figures moving through the snow. Their voices low and sharp. He pulled back quickly. His heart pounding, he looked at the girl. "Hunters," he whispered. She nodded, tears shining in her glowing eyes, her voice cracked. "They come?" The soldier's mind raced. If they found her here, they would not spare him either. His command might call it justice, the punishment for disobedience. He cursed under his breath. He had put himself in this trap, and now there was no way out. The footsteps grew louder, closer, circling. He could see shadows flickering across the thin tent wall. The girl whimpered softly, pressing her hand to her mouth to silence herself. The soldier's grip on the knife tightened. His other hand reached for his rifle leaning against the wall. He checked the chamber quickly. His stomach twisted. He had only a few bullets left. The voices outside rose, harsh and guttural. The language was alien, but the tone was clear. They were searching. They knew she was near. The soldier turned to her, his voice low but firm. "You can't stay here." She shook her head violently. "No. No. Storm, kill me." Her glowing eyes filled with tears. "Please. Safe." The word stabbed into him again. Safe. She had said it before. She said it now as if he was her last chance. The footsteps stopped outside the tent. Silence fell, so deep it pressed against his ears. Then came the sound of claws scratching at the canvas. The soldier raised his rifle, his breath sharp. The girl covered her face, trembling. The hunters did not enter. Not yet. They circled again, testing, watching. The soldier knew they were waiting. Waiting for him to make a mistake. Waiting for the storm to weaken the tent. His chest burned with fear and rage. He wanted to shout, to fight, to tear through the flap and drive them back. But he looked at the girl, fragile and weak beside the fire, and he knew the truth. If he fought alone, he would die. If he handed her over, he would live. The choice clawed at him. His order screamed in his head, "Aliens are enemies. Hand them over. Protect yourself." But her eyes, glowing with fear and hope, begged him to break every rule. The fire hissed as snow slipped through a crack in the tent. The cold rushed in, sharp as knives. The soldier lowered his rifle for a moment. His hand trembling, his voice broke into the silence. "Why should I risk my life for you?" The alien girl's lips parted. Her voice was weak, but her words cut deep. "Because you still human?" The soldier froze, his breath caught in his throat. Those words pierced through his armor. Through all the training, Through all the orders, she saw something in him he had almost forgotten himself. The hunters scratched again at the canvas. Louder this time, the tent shook as if it would tear apart. The girl crawled closer to him, clutching his arm with trembling fingers. "Please," she whispered, "don't. Give me." His heart pounded, his chest ached. This was the breaking point. He could not stand between two paths forever. He had to choose, her or his orders. The footsteps outside stopped again. And then came a deep growl, a signal. The hunters were preparing to enter. Time was over. The soldier raised his rifle. His knife strapped to his side, he looked at her. Her glowing eyes shone with tears and trust. Her small hand still clutching his arm. His voice came out as a whisper, more to himself than to her. "Then I'll fight." Her lips parted in shock. Her tears fell, she whispered, "Safe." One last time. The soldier turned toward the flap of the tent. His rifle aimed, his body tense. He knew what would happen when they entered. He knew he might not survive, but he had chosen. He had chosen her. And as the shadows outside grew larger, the human soldier prepared to face the storm, the hunters, and his own fate. The tent flap shook as claws scraped against it. The fire burned low, shadows danced wildly across the walls, and the soldier's rifle was raised. His heart thundered, but his hands were steady. The alien girl crouched behind him, clutching the blanket, her glowing eyes wide with fear. Outside, the hunters circled, their heavy footsteps crunching in the snow. Their guttural voices rumbled through the storm. The soldier could not understand the words, but he understood the intent. They were ready to strike. The flap tore open with a sudden slash. Snow and icy wind rushed in, carrying with it the shadow of a tall figure. The soldier fired. The crack of the rifle shook the small tent. The first hunter collapsed in the snow, a cry of rage echoing into the night. The others roared. Their claws and weapons slashed at the canvas. The tent shuddered, fabric ripping. The soldier fired again, his bullets tearing into the storm. Another hunter fell, but more pushed forward. Their glowing eyes burned with fury. The girl screamed softly, curling against the soldier's back. Her hands gripped his coat, as if her touch could anchor her to safety. He gritted his teeth, his body braced, his training roared inside him. But so did something deeper, something human. "Stay behind me," he growled. His rifle barked again, the recoil shaking his arms. A hunter staggered back, wounded but not dead. The storm carried the sound of more footsteps. Heavier, closer. They were too many. He could not hold them off forever. His ammo was low, his strength was fading. The cold bit at his skin, and yet his spirit burned hotter than ever. One hunter lunged through the torn flap, claws reaching for the girl. The soldier dropped his rifle and drew his knife. He met the beast with a furious strike, steel cutting flesh. The hunter howled, collapsing at his feet, blood steamed against the snow. The girl gasped, her glowing eyes locked on him. For the first time, she saw not just a soldier but a protector. Another shadow loomed, then another. The soldier fought like a man possessed. His blade flashed, his fist struck, his breath tore from his chest in ragged bursts. He moved not for himself but for her. The hunters hesitated. Circling, growling, their prey was no longer weak. The human stood tall, his knife dripping, his eyes burning with defiance. And then the storm itself seemed to still. The wind hushed as if the world held its breath. The hunters growled one last time, but then, one by one, they pulled back, dragging their fallen with them. Their voices faded into the distance. Swallowed by the night, silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire. The soldier stood trembling, his body bruised, his arms cut. Blood staining his coat, he dropped to his knees, his knife slipping from his hand. His breath came hard, fogging in the cold air. The alien girl crawled to him, her hands trembling. She touched his arm gently. Her glowing eyes shining with tears, she whispered one word, the same word she had spoken since the night began. "Safe." The soldier's chest tightened. His vision blurred. He looked at her, small, fragile, broken and yet alive, alive because of him. He let out a shaky laugh, one that sounded more like a sob. "Safe," he echoed. His voice cracked, but it was real. The girl pressed her forehead to his shoulder. Her tears warmed his frozen coat. For a long moment, neither spoke. They sat together in the torn tent, surrounded by snow, blood, and silence. The soldier knew what this meant. He had chosen her over his orders. He had fought against hunters, against his own command. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But as he looked into her glowing eyes, he realized something else. For the first time in years, he felt alive. Not as a soldier following orders, but as a man who had chosen to protect instead of destroy. The storm outside began to fade, the wind softening. The first hint of dawn glowed faintly in the distance, painting the ice with pale light. The girl leaned against him, her body weak but her spirit strong. "Together," she whispered in her broken tongue. Her eyes searched his face, filled with a fragile hope. The soldier nodded slowly. His voice was firm, steady despite the exhaustion. "Together," he said, and so, as the sun began to rise over the frozen wasteland, the soldier and the alien girl sat side by side. Two enemies no longer divided by war, but united by survival, trust, and a choice that had changed everything. The world outside would not understand. His commanders would call him a traitor. Her people would call him a killer. But none of that mattered now. In the small circle of firelight, they had found something greater than orders. Greater than fear, they had found each other. And the galaxy would never be the same again.